Ever since 1953, when Myron Scott, Chevrolet's then Assistant Director for Public Relations, suggested that their new sports car should be named after the smallest, most manoeuvrable class of warship, the Corvette has always been front-engined. Now though, the new 8th generation C8 is mid-engined. For the first time in a Corvette, the driver sits in front of the V8. So, we thought we'd have a final fling in what we now know is going to be the most powerful front-engined Corvette ever produced, the C7 ZR1. The first ZR1 came along in 1970 as a $1,221 option package on the C3 Corvette. The car had a solid lifter small block engine, new suspension, a heavy-duty 4-speed transmission, no power steering, no aircon, no electric windows, and no radio. They only ever built 53 of those, where there was actually a ZR2 pack as well. Next up was the C4 ZR1, which gained a hyphen and arrived in 1989. It was developed with Lotus, which was owned by GM at the time. It was also a world record holder, averaging a staggering 175.8 miles an hour for 24 hours at Fort Stockton in Texas. Initially, its 4-cam V8 put out 375 brake horsepower, but that increased to 405 brake horsepower in 1993. The engine was known as an LT5, and it was built by Mercury Marine in Oklahoma, who kept 2 engines for their own use. One of those engines ended up in a speedboat, which was wonderfully named the Vette. It's also somewhat ironic, given the origins of the Corvette name. The C6 generation was the next one to get a ZR1 variant, with a new supercharged 6.2-litre LS9 engine being unveiled at the end of 2007. Punching out 638 brake horsepower and 604 pounds-foot of torque, and with a claimed top speed of 205 miles an hour, it looked fantastic on paper. But to drive, I'm afraid it really wasn't that good. Nonetheless, the ZR1 badge is certainly one to be revered and perhaps a little feared, all of which leads us to the 4th iteration. So what makes this latest ZR1 so special? Well, the answer is right in front of you when you drive it. It's right there. BMW talks about power domes, but that's rather like comparing a tent in the garden compared to the O2 Arena. That is enormous. I mean, you actually sort of struggle to see around it. It's because this new LT5 engine replacing the LT4 that's in the Z06 is, well, it's about 50% bigger. It's got a huge 2.65 litre Eaton supercharger on it. That's up from about 1.7 litres for the one on the Z06. It puts out 755 brake horsepower, it's about 6,500 RPM and 715 pounds-foot of torque, although 600 pounds-foot of torque all the way from 2,000 RPM to the red line. And at that 6,500 RPM redline, the supercharger actually requires 110 brake horsepower to run. Conversely, however, the blower electronically decouples when necessary and only uses 1 brake horsepower to spin when cruising on the motorway, something that it does surprisingly well. It's never going to be considered a green machine though, not when the 6.2 litre engine has been given both port and direct injection, just so that it can feed enough fuel into the cylinders to create its huge power. And what does it feel like? It's an absolute monster. You can trickle around with it, around town, on the motorway. It doesn't feel any more wild than any other Corvette, really. But as soon as you start extending that throttle pedal, it's an animal. 0 to 60 miles an hour, it's claimed in 2.8 seconds. And if it doesn't do that, it's certainly nothing to do with the engine. It rocks the whole car if you rev it at a standstill. And the noise from those quad exhausts is all blood and thunder. I'm reliably informed that they spit flames, and I can well believe it. The ZR1 is a car of extremes, and after the engine, which surely must be the most extreme thing on this car, you might be wondering, well, what's next in the pecking order? Is it the downforce package, the high downforce package in the case of this car, which gives you 60% more downforce than a Z06 with that extreme Z07 package on it? But no, despite the huge rear wing, it's not that. Neither is it the very vibrant Sebring orange paint. Neither is it the halo hood, which doesn't really translate quite as well into British English because, I don't know, halo hood, so probably tonsure bonnet? Anyway, neither is it the carbon ceramic brakes, despite being 15.5 inches in diameter, which is 390-ish, just over, millimetres in modern money. Nor is it the fact it's got 13 radiators under this mostly carbon fibre skin. No, the most extreme thing about this car, after the engine, is the tyres. You see, with the track package, you get Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2s. So what, you might think, we've seen those on an awful lot of cars, even things like, well, I suppose the sort of Golfs and the most recent Porsche Cayman GT4. But these are a bit different. You see, they have the letters ZP on them, and you can only buy them for a Corvette. They're run flats, which is pretty amazing for a start, and they also appear to have absolutely no tread on at least half the tyre. I mean, look at this. This looks like it's done, well, several days at the Nürburgring probably, but this is pretty much a new tyre, and I've only been on the road with it. The tread depth on this outside is just extraordinary. So when they say for summer use only, in this instance they really, really do mean it. And aquaplaning written all over it. So what do those tyres mean for the handling? Well, you can tell that this is a car definitely designed for the track. We've got 3 modes: touring, sport and track. Sport is definitely the one for the road. It takes a while to dial into the ZR1 in terms of grip because there's not a huge amount of feel through the steering. At times you think it's probably misunderstood weight for feel, but once those Cup 2 ZPs are up to temperature on a day like today, it's extraordinary the G's you can pull through corners. And actually, it's got phenomenal traction. Thankfully those brakes are tremendous as well. They've got really good pedal feel, which is just as well because you lean on them an awful lot. As you can probably hear just there, the worst thing about this car, in fact one of the worst things I think I've ever felt in a car, is this gearbox. Thankfully you can have a manual transmission in this, and although you're going to be very busy and it's probably going to be pretty scary trying to take your hand off the wheel to change gear at times and operate 3 instead of 2 pedals, I would much rather have it because the shifts are just way too ponderous or never turn up at all with this auto box, this 8-speed auto. Apparently Chevrolet say that you should just leave it in auto and let it do its own thing, but on a road like this you need it in manual to be able to make the most of this car so it doesn't change up at the wrong moment. It does still feel like quite a heavy car. It weighs over 1,600 kilos, which is not light whichever way you cut it. And you do feel like you're always trying to get this big front end into the corners. Having said that, with the ZTK track pack that you get, the spring rates have gone up by 30% at the front and 13% at the rear. And given that this road is pretty bumpy, I'm amazed by how well it copes. You get new settings for the Magna Ride suspension. It does cope with it surprisingly well. To European sensibilities, this is not a delicate car. It tackles a road in an entirely different way. It's all monster pace and big physical grip. It feels like a car that's sort of designed almost by the military. If everything went a bit Mad Max, this is the sports car you'd want to be in, as much as you wouldn't want to be in a Lotus or something. This is the one that's going to see you through. It is a hell of a ride, the ZR1. It's not nuanced in its feedback. In fact, it needs to be worked really hard to make sense dynamically. And that in turn requires a deep breath and a brave pill or two if you're the one behind the wheel. It is flawed. And yet, there is something about this brash front-engine brute that is definitely appealing. I first remember really falling in love with them, listening to them at Le Mans. That sound in the middle of the night, you didn't need to know which car was coming by sight. You could just hear the Corvettes rumbling away. Both on the track and on the road, the front-engine Chevrolet Corvette is an automotive icon. Whether manufactured in Michigan, Missouri or Bowling Green, Kentucky, it has been a significant touchstone of the sports car spectrum. Not just in the USA, but around the world. And now, after selling over 1.6 million since 1953, the front-engine Corvette has reached the end of the road.